Greetings to all, and special greetings to Archbishop Kurtz and the other bishops who've been generous enough to take the time to come here to St. Louis Bertrand Parish as we celebrate both the people of disabilities and all of those who work throughout the United States and throughout the Archdiocese of Louisville to be of assistance to those who are in need. Our church is particularly appropriate in a sense because it's of what's called neo-Gothic or Gothic revival, and as you come into the church, you're immediately struck by these Gothic lines that are on the pillars. They draw you straight up and also the aisle itself takes you right, which you go up and then straight up to Christ on the stained glass windows that are behind the altar and below the vault. And so the impression as you come in is that how tiny we are and how good and big and important God is, and how insignificant we are, except that we have great significance because it is God who loves us. And all of us, no matter how brilliant we are or how weak we are, how confused we get, we're all children of God, and God never abandons us. So, and we're also blessed to have as one of our patron saints here, Saint Margaret of Castello, who was an Italian saint from the 14th century, and who was the daughter of a local warlord in northern Italy in a place called Mettola. He was a very locally powerful man, and in some ways brutal, and he was expecting to have his wife was to have his first child, and that child was to be the male heir that would be able to then carry on the lineage of his family. And so there was a great plan for a celebration on the day that his wife would give birth. But the celebration never happened because when she was born, they immediately recognized that she was a dwarf, they later recognized that she was completely blind. Her face was misshapen, her teeth came to a point like almost like one of the animals, a fox or one of those, and she had one leg larger than the other. And she came across, instantly they were ashamed because that could be, at that time in particular, accepted as a God saying that this family is inappropriate. This family is no longer has the support of God. And so they hid her. They had no celebration. They never mentioned that there was. And for 6 years, they hid this child in their castle. And they put the help in the castle on very strict orders that no one was to see her. But they did allow a Franciscan priest to be her sort of spiritual director from the earliest days. He did the baptisms and the Eucharist. But as she grew, she could move around rather quickly, but very much immediately recognizable as deformed. And so when she was about 6 years old, she was running through the castle and some visitors had come in, and the staff that was supposed to take care of her didn't know the visitors come in. She was seen by the visitors. It really upset this local king, and so he banished her basically to the forest on his property where there was a chapel, and he had a cell built attached to the chapel with an opening so that she could always see, but she couldn't see, but she had open to the tabernacle. And the Franciscan priest would go out, and for almost 10 years she lived that way. They only had, basically she was blocked in. They had a window on the outside and a window on the inside of the church, and they could bring food to her and take care of whatever the other needs were. And you would think that she would be someone who had grown emotionally along the lines of how she was malformed physically. But she didn't. The Franciscan apparently touched her heart so much in helping her to see what is God's will, what is that. And she came to see that God loved her so much that he gave her a little room where she could be with God at all times. And so for the better part of 10 years, she lived in that situation, but she developed a profound relationship with the Eucharist. And at that same time, she developed a sense that she had a purpose. She didn't know what it was, but there was a purpose. Maybe the purpose was simply to pray for the poor and pray for those who were less fortunate than she was. And you might not think that she would feel that way. And it reminded me of a man named Viktor Frankl, who was a psychiatrist right as World War II broke out. He was a young man, and he had just been qualified as a psychiatrist, and because he was Jewish, he was thrown in a concentration camp and spent just about the whole war in a camp. And he did a diagnosis of those who were around him. And it was interesting. Those who could be very strong but had no real purpose, no real mission, they died. Those who did, they were able to accept it. The purpose could have been, I'm living for my wife, I'm living for my children, I'm living for my nation. Well, it seems that the Lord gave Saint Margaret of Castello a sense that she had a purpose and a mission. And what finally happened to sort of launch her on her mission was exactly the opposite of what the family thought was going to be. They took her at age 16 and took her over from Metola to a village on the other side of the local mountains and took her to the tomb of a saint where there were reports that there had been cures. Well, they took her in the morning and left in the dark so she wouldn't be seen, took her in the morning, and then brought her into the church there by the side of the tomb, and they left her there. And they disappeared for the rest of the day. And when they came back, they saw that she wasn't cured, so the mother and father abandoned her there. And she stayed there the whole day, and when it came time for the church to close, the priest told her, well, you have to leave. And she went out, and they closed the church behind her, and immediately she was amongst street people, the poor. And at first they were upset because they thought she would be able to beg better than they would. But then they saw that she had rich garments, that because she was a king's family, she had things that they would never have. And that they thought, well, maybe we can take those. But what happened was her personality exuded a sense of love, unselfishness, of a desire to be whoever it is God wants her to be to these people. And she became very popular very quickly. And but the people that were taking care of her were so poor, they couldn't put her in any one house. So they would move her to different places. And as she would move to different places, where often there were arguments and quarreling, and that peace came to where she was. Eventually, the poor prevailed upon a local monastic community of sisters to take her in. And now she had been very rigorous when she was living in that little cell, that she would fast and she would attempt to give everything. And you know, as the saints get holier in their lives, their consciences become so sensitive that they all think they're unworthy. You know, you talk to Mother Teresa today. Well, this was Saint Margaret of Castello was in the same century as Catherine of Siena, and both of them the same in the sense that they both thought they were totally unworthy. And she lived such a simple and strict fidelity to the rule that it made the other sisters feel awkward, and they would correct her and tell her, you need to relax. And so she would try, but eventually they kicked her out because her living of the rule made them feel uncomfortable. So she went back out on the street. And eventually she ended up being taken care of by a wealthy family, or they would still continue to move her. But she would go out and be with the poorest of the poor. And there were during her lifetime, miracles attributed to her. They were attributed to her for things like physical healing. But she never, to our knowledge, she never asked for anything that would cure her. She never asked for any of her disabilities to be changed. She still was blind. This is about the actual scale size of her body. And so she was tiny. But eventually it came to a point where her health was failing, and she would still continue to go out, but the day came where she passed away. And she was only 33 years old, from 1287 to 1320. And so as they were carrying her on like a canvas mat into the church for the funeral, the people were saying, she's got to be buried in the church, this is a saint. And the priests were saying, we don't have the permission to do that, we can't do that, it's just not done until you actually have a saint canonized. And so they were arguing. They put the mat down. When they put the mat down, a lady took her very ill child and laid the child next to her. And I think the child had actually died. And her hand came up, touched the child, and the child was okay. And so that they buried her in the church. And so that was in 1220. And here we're in 2021. And so it took about, like I say, she was on the fast track. But what she had was able to deal with this disability, and which I think is available from the Lord himself to all who are suffering from different disabilities, is the sense that God never fails to love us, no matter what our ability. He gives us our abilities. He gives us our talents. He gives us the very grace to love one another, to help one another. And so Margaret stands for us in the midst of this very beautiful Gothic church, a sense of that gives the sense of God with us and how tiny we are, and yet she's saying by her very life, it's not a problem. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for God's blessing and God's love.